Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this Exploring Legal Futures webinar today. It's so very nice to see so many of you here. So today's session is all about solicitors and barristers. What do they do? How do they apply to do what they do? And what are the positives and negatives of doing each of those categories of law? So my name is Maria. I am the Outreach, Warning Participation and Communications Coordinator here at the Faculty of Law. And I've got some wonderful guests with me today, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a second. But a couple of housekeeping things before we actually get to the session. This session is being recorded and we will be uploading it to the faculty's YouTube channel, so you can watch it back whenever you like. And we will be touching on pre-submitted questions that you have submitted before the webinar throughout the session, but also straight after the panel discussion as well. But we do also ask you to submit any questions you've got throughout the session, so any live questions via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen as well. So please do ask those questions when you have them, and we'll try to get to all of them at the end. But this session will not actually be a presentation. It will have more of a panel format where I will be asking questions to our panelists to share their experiences and also discussing with them as well. So it will be a little bit different from the previous 3 sessions that you might have attended. But I would pass it on to them now. And if I can ask them all in turn to introduce yourselves, maybe tell us a little bit about the professional role, but also a little bit about their educational background as well. So a little bit about where they studied and what they studied at university. So if I can start with Narendra first, moving on to Alice and then Ola as well.
Oh, well, hi everyone. My name's Narinda Jitte. I'm a barrister at Maitland Chambers and I specialise in commercial disputes. I grew up in Birmingham and I went to a state grammar school there. I then went to do a law degree at Cambridge and a master's in Oxford, which is also in law. After that, I moved to London. That's where I did my training as a barrister, and we'll come on to the different stages of that later. And I've been in practice since 2011, which is a long time.
Hello, I'm Alice. I went to a private school on the South Coast and then studied history at Cambridge. I graduated in 2010, took a year out where I lived on a boat for a year. And then I did my GDL, which back then was the law conversion course, then the LPC, and I'm now a solicitor. I'm about 9.5 years qualified and I work at Clifford Chance.
Hello everyone, my name is Ola. I went to a state school in London, and from then I went to Cambridge in 2016, where I also studied history. I graduated in 2019 and I'd already gotten my training contract whilst I was at university, so I went straight on to do the GDL and then the LPC after that. I am a solicitor in the private equity team here at Clifford Chance, and I qualified in September 2023, so I'm about a year and a half qualified.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Saul. Okay, so let's kick it straight off then, talking about the differences between solicitors and barristers. And so a lot of the people attending this webinar might be thinking about those career paths. And some of you might be a bit younger, so you're thinking about university and where you can go in the future. Some of you might be at university, so you're looking a little bit more about how do I actually apply to those careers? What steps do I need to take? So we will touch on all of that. So first of all, though, I want to ask Narinda, what does the work of a barrister actually entail? What do you do in your day-to-day life?
Well, I should say, as I mentioned, I'm a commercial barrister, so I'll be giving you a sort of snapshot mainly of what it is that I do. And so I should say that barristers who specialise in other areas of law might have a different experience. But on the whole, barristers are essentially specialist legal advisors and they're advocates. So a lot of their work is either geared towards or actually physically in court, presenting cases and questioning witnesses and that sort of thing. As a commercial barrister, I tend to find that my cases are, consist of long trials, but there's a lot of time in between them to be preparing. So on a day-to-day basis, I might actually just be sat at my desk preparing documents and having meetings talking about how we're going to present our case rather than actually being in court. But for example, if you're a criminal or a family barrister, you might find yourself in court much more frequently than that. But I would say that our role, as I say, is mainly geared up towards hearings or other dispute resolution processes, rather than being the first port of call for a client. And I guess that might be a good uh, path to hand over to one of the solicitor panelists to describe what they do.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you so much. And so, yeah, Alice, do you want to talk a little bit more about the work that you do?
I can jump in. So Ola and I do very different work, despite both being solicitors at Clifford Chance. Ola mentioned she's in the private equity team. I am in our litigation team, which means I do the work of a solicitor in relation to any matter where generally two companies or two individuals have a dispute that they are trying to fight it out in court. As a result, I work very closely with barristers like Narinder, and I do attend court. In the courtroom, the barristers sit in tables up front, and I sit behind them with my team. And I would say the difference between what I do and what a barrister does, bearing in mind that we will be working on the same cases, is we tend to look into the facts behind a dispute, what happened that the parties are disagreeing on. And we tend to contact the lawyers representing the other party. So we will write letters setting out our position and respond to the other side's letters. We also tend to speak more closely with the client and to take instructions from the client and to give the client directly the advice. Whereas I always think the barrister does more of the legal side of it, so looks into the actual law that surrounds the facts that we're investigating.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And you said that you and Ola sort of do different types of work. So I'll have to ask Ola then, what do you do and how might that be a bit different to what Alice does, for instance?
So I would describe my work as being more transactional. And I think when people sort of think of solicitors, they would probably split it into contentious work, which is sort of the litigation side that Alice does, transactional work, which is the work that I do that I'll get into a bit more. And then the third part would sort of be more advisory work. So that would potentially be things like if you're a tax lawyer or an employment lawyer, and then you'd be providing legal advice in relation to those sorts of elements of the law. In terms of transactional work, my work specifically, so with private equity, it is when you have financial institutions which are basically, for me, I think probably the easiest example is, let's say you have a pension fund. So all of us work, we have sort of money that we put into our pensions, and those funds invest that money into sort of various different investments so that hopefully when we retire we can have some money. But sometimes what they will do is that they will use that money to buy a business or an interest in a business in a hope to sort of make a profit and then sell it on, which is how sort of that investment grows. So we might potentially advise them on the sale or the purchase of one of those companies that they're buying. So that's the sort of transactional element to my work. I don't go to court in terms of my interaction with barristers. It's very different. It's more sort of, I guess, on an educational basis. So we often do actually see sort of commercial barristers come in and sort of talk to us about, I guess, the flip side when they're doing contentious work in court when deals have sort of gone wrong. What they see, what it does look like at court. So we can take those things into consideration when we're, for example, drafting the transaction documents, but you wouldn't typically see a sort of transactional solicitor in court. So yeah, it's very different.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. So, something I picked up on actually when you were and sorry, you were Ola and Alice were speaking, is you said a lot of we. So I think a difference what we might want to touch on here is how much each type of lawyer works in a team or how much they work alone. So I don't know, Ola, if you want to maybe continue on what you were saying and talk a little bit about, do you work in a team? Do you work alone? Is it a mix? How does it work for solicitors?
So for solicitors, it is a team. My team is quite large. Probably maybe 30 plus people, I guess, in my sort of private equity team. It might be larger actually. And then I guess you can have some smaller sub teams. So you would, for example, have a deal team on one of these transactions that I'm talking about where you sort of buy or sell something, and it would be structured as you'd have someone very senior who's maybe a partner, maybe a more senior solicitor, sort of like Alice's level, someone more junior that like my level, and then maybe a trainee, which is kind of like the graduate program equivalent for being a lawyer.
And Narendra, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about the barrister side of? the team or
Yeah, of
loneliness?
course. I should say that for barristers, there's two routes you can go down potentially. One is you could become an in-house barrister and be employed at a solicitor's firm or in-house somewhere. And in that case, I think your structure and your team working would be actually very similar to what Ola's just mentioned. The majority of barristers, though, as I understand it, are self-employed, and instead they're part of associations of barristers called chambers. So I'm Maitland Chambers, for example. Um, and within that structure, you are an independent practitioner. So the way you work might vary from case to case. There are some cases I'm doing where I'm the only barrister on the case. So I'm still working as a team, but in a team with the solicitors on the case and then ultimately the client. And then there'll be other cases, probably ones that are larger in scale, where I'll be the junior barrister and there'll be someone more senior who's actually leading me on the case. So, for example, a King's Counsel who's like a different, more senior rank of barrister. So in that case, I'll be working quite closely with another barrister to figure out what our strategy will be and how we'll present things. So it kind of varies from case to case.
Brilliant. Okay, so before I move on to sort of the next section, which is about deciding to be a solicitor, I actually want to touch on a pre-submitted question we have to Narinda. And somebody's asks, and it's a really good question, what is a King's Counsel barrister? Or you might have had it as Queen's Counsel in the past, obviously, depending on reigning monarchs. So yeah, do you want to talk a little bit more about that, maybe?
Yeah, of course. So as I just indicated, a King's Counsel is kind of more senior rank of barrister. It's a position that you can apply for when you're quite a few years into practice, maybe 15 years plus. And it's sort of a mark of your sort of confidence in your advocacy skills and your specialism. So it's quite a rigorous application process. And once you've got that rank, you can use the letters, and it also, I think it's just a mark of your seniority and your specialism in the area.
Brilliant. Thank you so, so much. Okay, so let's move a few steps back now. Let's think a little bit about deciding to be a solicitor or a barrister. How do I decide between those two career pathways? So if I throw it to Alice, maybe, do you want to talk a little bit about when do students or individuals usually decide? Maybe when did you decide on what career you wanted to do? And if you also want to tell us a little bit about how you decided. So what steps did you sort of take to say, okay, I actually want to be a solicitor now? Did you attend events? Did you speak to people? So yes, all of those lovely things if you want to touch on them.
Sure. I had a not particularly structured route into being a solicitor. I was in my second year of university and I wanted a job over the summer. And my friend was going to a law fair and told me that solicitors' firms offered work experience over the summer that you could get paid for. And so I thought that sounded interesting. I would go along to the law fair. I saw Clifford Chance's brochure. I spoke to some really friendly people at the law fair. I applied for the summer internship and I was offered it. And I then loved it and realized that that's what I wanted to do as a job, having not thought before then that I wanted to be a lawyer or whether I wanted to be a solicitor or a barrister at all. Um, However, when I was doing the summer internship and I was thinking about it and speaking to more lawyers and thinking about the difference between being a solicitor and a barrister, the main thing I really enjoyed about the solicitor's work that I felt I wouldn't have as a barrister is the working in a team, as Ola was saying earlier, the people that would surround me. And I could see that on this work experience that I was doing, that everyone I was working with was very much embedded within a team. And Narinda may tell me that this was all wrong in my head, but I had this image that if I was a barrister, it would be very much like continuing my history degree, where I was sat surrounded by heavy books in a library by myself with my head down day in, day out. And I didn't want to do that anymore.
Lovely image there. Thank you so much, Alice. Narinda, is maybe being surrounded by heavy books something that attracted you? Yeah.
I'd say it's more kind of being embedded in like legal databases these days because we very rarely go to the library itself. But yeah, sometimes it can be a little bit solitary like that because you'll be researching something by yourself. But as I said, there are other ways in which you do have some team working as well. Um, For me, the decision is one that I made at university because, as I say, I was doing a law degree, and I took all of the opportunities I could to try and do different kinds of work experience to try and figure out what would suit me best. And I think work experience is probably, I would say, one of the best ways you can do that because you get to actually see what the the job is like in practice. And I think as much as anything, I'd quite like the lifestyle of being a barrister. You're self-employed, you have a bit more control, I think, over your working hours, your caseload, your direction of travel for your practice and your specialisms and that sort of thing. And I really like that. And I also just quite like the idea of being a little bit closer to the legal side of things, because as Alice said, a barrister will mainly focus on what's the legal analysis and how we're going to present that. So for me, that was one of the key uh, decision-making factors.
Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you so much. And sort of touching on something you said, can you talk a little bit about more? We'll touch on that later as well. But structuring your own time. So is that something a barrister does a lot more? Obviously, solicitors kind of work in a firm or in a company, as many people think about it. But with a barrister, would you say that you just have more control of your own time?
To an extent, yes, but also you have to bear in mind that we're client facing as well to an extent. So if
Mm.
you've got calls or things that are happening on your case, those will be fixed points in your day. And obviously, if you're going to be in court, then that's a fixed point in your day as well. But apart from that, I think, yeah, I do have quite a lot of freedom to structure when and how I work.
Brilliant. Fantastic. So I guess that's something that people can think about when they're applying to these jobs is, do you want to be more in a context of a team? Maybe, a little bit of your day-to-day life is arranged for you. Do you just want to have a little bit more control of it? And different people work in different ways, I would say. So it's not necessarily that one is better than the other. It's just whatever suits your sort of working style. But a really commonly asked question, actually, and I'll throw it to Ola because she's actually quite recently, relatively recently graduated, and qualified as well, is how easy is it to keep your options open? You're considering both a solicitor and barrister out. Is it easy to keep your options open? Is it possible?
So, um, it's an interesting question. I do actually know somebody that left to sort of pursue the barrister route. So I think it is possible to do. But I think it is quite a commitment, but I'd probably consider it or compare it more closely to a career change rather than sort of changing departments within a job. Because I think if you were to make the transition, you probably do have to go back and study for a bit. I'm not sure how it works in terms of if you've got a certain number of years of experience, it's sort of straight in. So I think the option is there, but that is sort of therefore, I guess it's a personal decision. But I have also sort of heard of barristers come in house to work in private practice. So yeah, I think the option is there.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that's a really good comparison, actually. It's changing between careers, always possible. And for any career, even outside of law, you can always change, but it takes some studying, it takes research, it might take sitting extra qualifications. And actually, that's a good segue into the next thing I want to talk about, which is qualifications, qualifying as a barrister, qualifying as a solicitor. So let's start with the barristers first. So, Narinda, do you want to touch a little bit more about the qualification process for being a barrister and maybe talk a little bit about qualifying with a law degree and without a law degree as well, if that is different for barristers?
Yeah, of course. So there's essentially three stages to qualifying as a barrister. The first stage is the academic stage, and that's where you've done your degree, and that could either be a law degree or it could be something else like history, for example. And the difference there is that if you've done a non-law degree, you will also have to do a conversion course. And Alice touched on this, and Ola, in fact, a course called the GDL Graduate Diploma in Law, and that's usually a one-year qualification, or some course providers will allow you to do it over a longer period. And then once you've done that, you're effectively in the same position as someone who did a law degree. Then after that, the second stage is what they call the vocational stage. And although there's been a bit more flexibility over the past few years as to how that can be delivered, generally speaking, that's a year-long course, a bar training course of some kind, provided by a college, and that will go into more specific skills, like, for example, negotiation and advocacy, and civil and criminal procedure as well. So it's actually going a little bit away from the academic side of things, more towards the practical side of things, but it's still college-based, effectively lectures and seminars and that sort of thing. Then the third and final stage is what they call pupillage, which is a work-based placement, kind of like a paid internship. So you're based at a set of chambers or within an organisation like the Crown Prosecution Service, for example, and that's where you're trained by barristers on the job. You get to shadow actual practitioners, see what they're working on, and have your own work assessed. So that's the final stage.
Yeah, and can you maybe talk a little bit about the timeline for this? So is it the same for everybody? Can you sort of take breaks in between all those stages? Because I'm aware you mentioned, quite a few different things. Do people sort of do them all one after the other linearly, or do people kind of take breaks? How many years, I suppose, could it take for somebody to do all of that?
You could take breaks. I think a lot of people do, and they'll, for example, work as a paralegal or something else in between the different stages. But you can absolutely do it all the way through as well. So the academic stage, the stage where you're at university doing a degree, a law degree is typically 3 years. And if you did that plus your conversion course, that would take it to 4 years instead of 3. The vocational stage is typically a year-long course, although some providers will give you the option to do it part-time. Some even, I think, do remote learning as well. So that might take longer than a year, depending on which option you choose. And then the final stage, pupillage, is typically a year because it consists of 6 months. The first 6 months will be just purely shadowing, and then the second 6 months, some sets of chambers will allow you to actually go out and practice and be on your feet as well, doing some advocacy of your own. So that's usually a year-long process.
Amazing. Thank you so, so much. And now if I kind of throw it to Alice to give her side, and actually somebody in the Q&A box is asking specifically about Alice, your journey. So if you can maybe talk a little bit generally about the sort of solicitor qualifying process and maybe, the steps you took. I think you mentioned them a little bit earlier as well, but always worth repeating for people that maybe joined a little bit later as well.
Yes, so I was I studied history, and then, as I said, I went and did this summer internship called a vacation scheme in the summer of my second year, and at Clifford Chance. And at that point, that was a month long. They don't do it as it's not as long as that these days, I don't think. Um, Following that, at the end of that session, I applied for the training contract and was given a training contract. I then had a year, a year off. At that point, it was the financial crisis, so companies were crying out for people who wanted to not start immediately and push their start date back a little bit. So I said, "Oh well, I've still got another year left of my degree, and I want to go traveling for a year before I even start my GDL, which is the law conversion course." So in 2009, I was given a job offer that wouldn't start until 2013. Um, so I started then my GDL in, I guess it would have been summer 2011. And at that point, that was the law conversion course, which was a 1 year course. And then I did the LPC, which was a specific course to being a solicitor, which I think is now the SQE. And that at that point was something like an 8-month course. All of that was paid for by Clifford Chance. So the fees for the courses were paid by Clifford Chance, and they give you a small amount to live on as well while you're training. And then I started the training contract, which was 2 years before I qualified.
Brilliant. Is it common for firms to fund this process as you're sort of doing what would have been the GDL and now the SQE, or is it just a Clifford Chance thing, would you say?
No, it's pretty common for the larger firms. Smaller firms or boutique firms or sometimes regional firms are less likely to do it. But certainly the larger ones and the city law firms, it's pretty common.
Brilliant. Hopefully they can alleviate some worries. For anybody in the audience that is wondering how can I fund all of these qualifications. I will also add, I have added 2 links that hopefully everybody can see in the chat about becoming a solicitor and becoming a barrister. So all of that information that we're talking about from the officials online. So you should definitely give that a read as well, particularly for the SQE, which is the new way to qualify as a solicitor, and it is actually quite recent. So yeah, I feel like the SQE website, or the solicitor the Solicitor Regulation Authority website is a little bit better suited at talking about that in detail, as yeah, it's quite recent, so not many people have done it yet. I will also say that our next webinar is actually touching on these things in a little bit more detail when we're talking about internships, vacation schemes, and training contracts. So do also join that one if you want to hear a little bit more detail about the SQE. But yeah, if you want to kind of look at all of those qualification processes in detail, I have added those links in the chat as well. Okay, brilliant. So, something that I don't know if any of you kind of have experience on, maybe you know people that have experience on it, is can you qualify at like a later point in life? And when I say a later point in life, I don't necessarily mean when you're like 25, but maybe, you want to have a complete career change, you reach the age of 40 and you think, gosh, I really do not like my sort of career path. Can I go into law then? Do you think that's possible? And are there sort of many people that do that? We're not going to throw it at everybody. Yeah, Alice, if you want to touch on that.
I can answer this because I was recently advising a friend of mine who we're in our mid-30s now about a change in career to law. It is very possible. And certainly when I was doing my training contract, when I was in my early 20s or mid-20s, there are people that were a little bit older. In the larger law firms, what I would say is difficult about that is they tend to have quite structured routes through people graduating from university and then doing the legal training courses and then the training contracts. So you would be on your training contract with people who were 10, 20 years younger than you. Um, which isn't necessarily an issue at all. But you would be also then taking instructions from, say, newly qualified lawyers who would also be 10, 15, 20 years younger than you. Again, not necessarily an issue, but my friend who had been very senior in his current job, I did say you may find it a bit difficult taking instructions from someone who does know more than you about the law, but actually in terms of business and in terms of commercial aptitude, my friend would have a lot more experience, and so I felt like you might find that quite challenging. So I think it is entirely possible, and in different places where different law firms where there's maybe less of a structured route in after being a graduate, it would be a lot easier. But I think the personal aspect of that could be quite challenging at times.
And I think to add to that as well, I have sort of two kind of different examples. So on my trainee cohort, we actually had somebody who was early 30s but had previously had another career as a rugby player. So very different and probably wouldn't be what you'd kind of expect typically from a lawyer. And then he'd gone back to university to do his law degree and decided to pursue law. And I think he qualified into the funds team. And then another example, I guess, of somebody who sort of changed career in their later life, there was another sort of trainee who I think she was in her late 30s. She'd done, I think it was kind of a very like IP focused PhD route, took some time out to have a family. So she did have sort of prior work experience, but her training contract was her first job, if that makes sense. So I think when you do see it, it is sort of a different story, but it does happen. So yeah, just wanted to throw that in there as well.
Brilliant. That's really useful, really encouraging, I would say. Oh, sorry, go on, go
Just
ahead.
I was going to say on the barrister side, I think it's the same. It's totally doable, and actually, people who have had previous careers and previous life experiences can bring quite a lot to the job because it's not just your legal skills that are relevant. It's also your, interpersonal skills and your commercial awareness and that sort of thing that can really help you in the job. So I think it is doable, and I think it would come with similar sort of challenges to those that Alice was referring to, but perhaps less so in the barrister context because you're not sort of embedded within a hierarchy or a team. A lot of the time you're working independently, so I'm not sure it would necessarily um, jar so much on a personal side.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's really encouraging, actually, I would say, for anybody considering it. Yeah, changing career a bit later in life. A bit of a spoiler alert about the next webinar again to sort of make you excited and hopefully make you sign up. We do have somebody in our next webinar, which is about, sorry, not the next, the one after the next, which is about qualifying as a solicitor, having not done a law degree and some of the experiences people have doing that. And it's somebody who has actually worked in medicine before, so really quite different sectors there. So yeah, if you want to hear more about that, do definitely go and check out that webinar. So yes, do sign up on our website. Okay, so Narinda actually passed it on to my next question very well once she mentioned hierarchy. So let's talk a little bit about now. You're a solicitor or you're a barrister. How early on in your career can you maybe establish yourself? And I suppose that might be a little bit more barrister related, but how quickly can you build your caseload and what do you do to get those cases and to build your caseload? So if maybe I start with Narendra and then, yeah, if Alice and Ollie got anything to add, we can touch on that as well.
I think that's a really good question because I think as a barrister, a lot of your practice will depend on how much work you've put into building that practice. So initially, when you start out, if you're at a set of chambers, most of your work will be coming through chambers. A solicitor will ring up the clerks probably and say, I need a really junior barrister to help me with X, Y, Z. The clerks will think of which barristers they have who could do that, and then give the solicitor the option, and they'll choose somebody, and then if you get instructed, off you go. But the ideal is so that you can have your own contacts and your own solicitors who you've worked with before who would want to work with you again. And so I think it's something you can start doing from very early on. And the kind of marketing you might do would be firstly, doing a really good job on a case that you've done so that someone wants to instruct you again. But a lot of people also do things like giving talks at solicitors firms or more widely to societies and things like that, or writing articles, being a contributor to a book. There's lots of different things that people do, and I think it very much depends on your personality, what you prefer to do to build up those connections.
I don't know if Alice or Ola, you've got anything to add to that. Maybe more kind of relevant to solicitors would be kind of a question that we had that's actually pre-submitted as well, is how do you specialize, and can you specialize? When does that happen? Do you have any kind of say on your specialization? Hopefully you do. So yes, I suppose, if maybe Alice first and then Ola, you can talk a little bit about how you went into the different sectors that you followed in your firm.
Yeah, so having been qualified for 9.5 years now, I've had the time to, I guess, specialize and to kind of build my practice. And lots of it in the solicitor world is exactly the same as Narinda says. You do a good job on the matters that you're working on. You get the partners to think that you are a safe pair of hands who meets deadlines, etc., etc., and then they will come to you for more work, and you build your name as being known for doing a good job about this in this area or in that area, or that sort of thing. um and then in terms of how you specialize, you do have to kind of take it as it comes in the first few years, particularly as a solicitor in a large firm, because you will be at the mercy of in litigation anyway, the types of cases that come in. And I'm sure in private equity, it's the types of deals that come in, and it's where the work is where you'll be needed to go. What I've found is that everything I've worked on could be described as being very, very, very different. So someone might think, well, she's obviously not specializing at all. This is all really different. Um, but it's about drawing the common threads between each of your matters and really thinking about what that golden thread is, and then looking for other things that tie in to that. So I do commercial litigation, I do cases that go to court. I have a huge amount of experience in settling cases. So I'm very experienced in negotiating settlements. I've also managed one of the largest matters in our firm for a number of years. So I've got a lot of experience of managing large matters. And it's through doing that and getting my name out for those sorts of things that I'm then approached specifically on those topics.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. That's very useful. Ola, do you want to also maybe touch on your own kind of sector?
Sure. I'll actually take it back a bit, because I guess people might be wondering, oh, how do I know that, like, when I step foot in the door, that, I know I want to be a litigator, I will know that I want to do private equity or whatever might be sort of at the front of your mind. So when you're at Clifford Chance, but also similarly at other law firms, during the training contract, you sit in 4 different teams, which lasts for 6 months each. So at the beginning of the training contract, you get like this guidebook that gives you an overview of like what the team does, sort of deals or transactions that they might have been a part of, for you to kind of base your experience on. And of course, you can sort of reach out to people across the firm at sort of all different levels to kind of do your research a bit more. And then at the end of the 2-year training contract, you sort of apply back to those teams, or potentially maybe a team you haven't sat into, for a job, which is, I guess, how you begin your specialization. So in terms of my team, in terms of private equity, I'm still quite junior. So I've specialized in terms of, like, I've chosen private equity, so I've kind of narrowed down a bit more. But for example, my group has a few different pillars within private equity itself, which, for example, are some partners do infrastructure focused work, some do sort of European core PE, others do sort of emerging markets focused work, and others do sort of clean energy work. So I think those partners that are sort of like, the clean energy partner would be like a clean energy specialist, and that would be what he's known for in the market. But of course, he would sort of have, I guess, the technical and like subject matter knowledge of like, how the key transaction documents and things like that work. But I think just kind of like piggybacking on what Alice said, like at the junior stage, it's just kind of getting as much experience as possible so that you can kind of then decide later on what you want to be known for and sort of like build your name in that area. So yeah.
Brilliant. That's all sounds really useful. Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose that's really good advice to try different things. Try different sectors, work with different teams, try and understand what might fit your interests. And I suppose as well, I don't know if I'm wrong in that, but you might be surprised by what you actually enjoy. You might kind of come in and say, I actually really want to work on this one thing. I know I want to work on this one thing. And then you kind of try out different things and you think, oh gosh, I actually really did not like that one sector of law that I thought I liked when you actually work on it, and then you change your mind. So I suppose that's one of the really positive things of doing a training contract. You actually get different experiences rather than just being straight into one sector. So that, yeah, it's very, very encouraging. Thank you. Okay, so maybe let's talk a little bit about now your kind of day-to-day life. And the one thing I do want to kind of touch on is the different skills that barristers and solicitors use on their sort of everyday life, because that can maybe help people as well think about which profession they're interested in terms of what are my strongest skills, what skills do I feel more confident in, and which profession do they better sort of slot into. So if I keep it to Ola, to kind of staying with you, what kind of skills does a solicitor use in their day-to-day life?
So I think there is a split in terms of technical skills and I guess more transferable skills, which is probably what people talk about a lot. At the junior end, I think you probably do a lot of transactional management things, which would be sort of, okay, on a deal, you would be the person that's in charge of, keeping, note of the deadlines when things have to happen. You would probably have to sort of organize meetings. You would also probably have to maybe review documents initially just to kind of like check everything is there. When it comes to signing transaction documents, let's say there's a pack of 80 documents to go out to 80 different parties, you'd sort of be in charge of handling that process. So I think organization and attention to detail probably two of the bigger skills that people would need, but you'll kind of see that that doesn't really necessarily, it doesn't only come from working in a law firm. You can develop those skills elsewhere, perhaps through having, another job, or maybe sort of if you're at university, if you're in a society, or just generally speak this through day-to-day life or your degree. And then on the technical side of things, so as I said, it's transactional work. So for us, the two biggest documents that we probably work on are like a share purchase agreement and a shareholders agreement. So a share purchase agreement would govern, I guess, the relationship between buyer and seller, and a shareholders agreement would sort of govern the relationship between when you have multiple sort of people who are interested in a business. So I guess once I qualified, I was able to sort of do some of the drafting of that, but those are kind of the skills that you learn on the job and you're taught. And obviously, like, if you're doing the most important M&A transaction of the year, I'm not drafting that SBA. That's probably somebody that's more senior than me. So yeah, I think in terms of things that you can focus on when you're sort of at the beginning of your career, don't sort of write off those transferable skills, because yes, it would actually be kind of insane to come to an interview and say that, yeah, I've actually drafted those transaction documents before, but you can very easily sort of point to those more transferable skills as a uni student, as somebody who's graduated and is working in another job, to kind of show the law firm or the person interviewing you that, yeah, you'd be a safe pair of hands as a trainee, as a junior associate. So yeah.
Yeah, that's very useful. And Narendra, are some of those skills common for barristers, would you say?
I think definitely, yeah, there's a degree of organization and attention to detail that I think lawyers in general need, because you're kind of being paid to make sure that things don't go wrong or that things go right. So being on top of deadlines and organizing your time, thinking ahead to what obstacles might be coming in the way and how to navigate them, those sort of things are really important. I think on the barrister side, another key skill is basically your reasoning and your analysis, because a lot of the time you're just trying to make sense of the case and think about what's our strategy going to be and how are we going to use the law to get to achieve our objectives. So it's having that sort of ability to think quite carefully about different cases and how they might relate to your case, and to figure out what the stronger arguments are, what the weaker arguments are, where your strengths and weaknesses in your own case analysis. And then the other big one is advocacy as well, which isn't just what you might imagine. It's not purely public speaking. It's also being able to persuade people in both orally and in writing. So a lot of the work that I do is actually written advocacy, writing skeleton arguments, or even helping to write the sort of correspondence, the letters that Alice was talking about, trying to get people to come around to your point of view, whether that's with a view to a court hearing or a negotiation. And I think, as Ola said, those are skills that you don't necessarily have to have developed in a legal context. They're all things that you can be developing through other work that you're doing, through your university work, through all your extracurricular activities, being involved in societies, and just dealing with people day to day.
Incredible. And a very good segue into the next question. You're predicting my mind here. It's incredible. So if I ask Alice, actually, as sort of kind of maybe we're kind of finishing the panel discussion now before we get to questions. So as the last thing, a little bit of advice about people that maybe are currently in sixth form or equivalent, finishing their school education, or maybe they are at university. What can they be doing now? What activities can they be doing? How can they be building those skills that Narinda and Ola mentioned? Do they only need to do sort of legal related activities? Can maybe their extracurricular activities help, like sports or music or whatever they might be doing? Yeah, maybe a little bit touch on that.
I think it's really important to do something that you enjoy, um, and not to stress too much about it. You might think, oh, I've got no opportunity to go and do a legal internship, so I'm never going to get a job as a lawyer because I'm not going to be able to develop those skills. And that is just not true in the slightest. Most of what we've talked about are transferable skills that you can pick up anywhere. Ola was mentioning organization and attention to detail. Well, if you are, I don't know, I'm very awful at sports, so I'm going to make a hash of this, but if you run a sports club or you're the captain of the local football team and you have to organize when you're going to go to matches and how people are going to get to matches, or if you manage some kind of social club, all of that is huge amounts of organization. If you are raising money for a charity, that's organization. You might be working with the charity, that's teamwork. Sports is great for teamwork and building up those skills. In the work that I do, I think writing is so key, and being able to write in good English, and to get your points across concisely. So if you volunteer for a student magazine, again, that will give you loads and loads of writing experience. um so really, I think basically anything can end up being really, really helpful for law. It's just building your overall experience, essentially.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's very useful as well because I think a lot of people might be thinking, I don't have a lot of society at my university. I don't have a lot of society at my school. I don't have kind of law firms coming to speak to me at my university. What do I do? What sort of things can I get involved with? Does that completely write off my the possibility of becoming a lawyer? So yeah, that's very, very encouraging. I don't know if maybe Narinda or Ola, do you have anything to add, or did Alice cover everything?
I think I definitely agree with what Alice said. I think everything she said applies to if you're thinking of the barrister route as well. Some additional things to think about from the barrister side. It's things like debating or mooting, things that kind of involve you having to engage with, not get into arguments, but engage in arguments, and sort of test out your reasoning skills and grow your reasoning skills. And I think they're just great things to do to build your confidence. But that's not to say that they're essential. So don't panic if you don't have those opportunities, or you don't have those opportunities yet, because you can still be developing your debating or your negotiation skills in lots of other contexts as well. They don't have to be formal mooting or debating competitions.
Do you want to maybe touch a little bit on what mooting is, just in case anybody?
Yes, sorry.
No, no
So
worries.
mooting is sort of like a mock appeal hearing. So you're given a very limited amount of time to argue a specific point, that you've been assigned. So it's part of the skill is kind of turning your hand to being able to argue whichever point of view. And it takes place before someone who acts as a judge, and they let you present your argument, but they also will make interventions and ask you questions to test the strength of your argument as well. So it's both about how well you present and also how well you respond to their questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's very useful. Wonderful. Okay, so if I sort of ask you one last question before we get to questions from attendees, and thank you so much to everybody who's been using the Q&A box and has pre-submitted questions as well. If I start with Ola and then Narinda and then Alice, just because that's the order on my screen. Can you maybe say what is your favorite thing about your job? Maybe it's one thing, maybe it's multiple things, but yeah, let's focus on your one favorite thing that you really like about your job.
I'm gonna cheat and I'm gonna mix them into two. So I think the thing that I really like about my job is how international it is. Because a lot of the transactions that we do aren't just sort of UK-based clients or UK-based sort of assets or companies that are the focus. It's kind of global and around the world, which I think is really interesting because a lot of the deals that I do are also sort of the ones that would appear in newspapers and things like that, which I think makes it a bit more fulfilling. And also sort of linked to that international element during my training contract, I had the opportunity to go and live abroad, and I'm starting to kind of now get into the being able to travel for work, which is nice. So yeah.
Brilliant. What about you, Narinda?
I really love the variety. I think I chose to work at a set of chambers that does a variety of different practice areas. So over the 14 or so years that I've been in practice, I've done so many different types of commercial disputes, and I've also come across a whole range of different clients as well. So I've just quite liked that. It's been quite exciting adapting to different types of cases and different types of clients over the years.
Brilliant.
I also love the variety. I really love the work of litigation. I like when you get a new matter and it's like a puzzle. You've got to try and work out the best way through it and the best way to put your arguments. I really like writing. I've always liked writing. So I love that my job means that I do that all of the time. And it's a bit trite, but I just love the people that I work with as well. Some of them are now my best friends outside of work. We laugh so much in the office together. I trust these people a lot, and they make the day-to-day incredibly enjoyable. So I think I'm very lucky for that reason.
Brilliant. All very lovely things. So hopefully all of you are now convinced that you want to be lawyers, because I definitely am very close to convinced after this discussion. So very, very many thanks for this. So let's now move on to some of the pre-submitted questions we have. And there's a lot of really wonderful questions. So I apologize in advance that we will not get to any of them. But I'm sort of going to flip the conversation on its head a little bit, because somebody is asking, what is the biggest challenge of its profession of a barrister and of a solicitor? So if I start with a solicitor first, either Alice or Ola, can you think of a big challenge of being a solicitor? Maybe there's not any. Who
I
knows?
mean, Ola and I probably have different biggest challenges. For me, the there's two. The flip side of lots of variety is I am still having been done, having worked at CC for it's 11 and a half years I've been here in total now. I am still faced with things that I do not know the answer to. I can't figure out how to get the answer to, and I have to try and work out what the answer is. And because of being that bit more senior now, there's pressure on me that I'm expected to know and to be able to work out what the answer is. So that's a lot of pressure, which is challenging. But having the people around me means I'm never entirely by myself. I can rely on others for help. And then the other thing that can be challenging is when you have different competing things on at once, with urgent deadlines, and trying to work out how you juggle that can be quite challenging.
Mm. I don't know, Ola, if you have sort of different challenges that you want to speak to Alice.
I would say that the biggest challenge for me is, I guess, how sometimes unpredictable my practice area is, because of course it is sort of led by the client, which is a business, but also at the end of the day, they're people. So things can just sort of like pop up and have really, really urgent deadlines, which means that, it's kind of all hands on deck for a really short period of time to get something done. And I think when you're a junior, that might be your first time having done that thing. So you're having to do it under sort of like really, really tight time pressure, but also learning how to do it at the same time.
What about you, Narinda? What is the biggest challenge of being a barrister?
I think that actually I would echo all of the challenges that Alice and Ola have said. They apply equally, I think, to being a barrister. But I think the other one for me is just the sense of responsibility, because the flip side to working independently is sometimes the buck really does stop with you, and it kind of comes down to your judgment call as to what you think is the best thing to do. And it's also that you don't necessarily have another person you can sort of fall back on if something comes up urgently. So sometimes you do have to make sure you're available to deal with something. But having said that, I think it is possible to have quite a good work-life balance as well, and to be open with your clients about when you are and aren't available, and try and predict things that might come up and make other arrangements for them. But sometimes, yeah, it can feel like a lot is on your shoulders personally.
Like, just hearing that gives me a little bit of stress, I have to say, just making all those important decisions. Okay, so you actually said work-life balance. So we've got a couple of questions that I'm going to sort of combine into one, about work-life balance. Which of the two maybe professions has the best work-life balance? If you do have it, which hopefully you do. And which one has the more flexible sort of hours? So not necessarily the few hours, but more flexible hours. So open to all of you if you want to touch on that. Alice?
I mean, I don't know which one has the best work-life balance, because from the barristers I work with, they work incredibly hard, and we work incredibly hard. So I'm not sure there's much of a difference necessarily between barristers and solicitors. It might be more dependent on the type of work you do as a barrister or the type of work you do as a solicitor.
Would you agree, Narinda, with that?
I think so. I think, as I said, I feel like as a barrister, you do have a little bit more flexibility in terms of the sort of the hours you keep, which means that if you're a very early morning person, you can put your work more towards that end of the day, or a late night person, you can do the opposite. Um, so yeah, but otherwise, I think it's generally quite similar.
Oh, wonderful. Hopefully that's quite positive. So a really interesting question that somebody has asked, and I suppose for either the barristers or solicitors, is there a lot of opportunity for pro bono work? And maybe whoever answers that cannot actually explain what pro bono work is.
I do quite a lot of pro bono work. Pro bono is work that the firm does for free, for charities and the like. I have worked with 5x More, which is a charity um, that campaigns for better outcomes for Black women giving birth, Black maternity services. And then I've worked for other charities in relation to refugees and asylum applications, and I'm currently doing something in relation to a charity that helps adults get into education when they've got developmental difficulties. So sorry, not from gets them from education into work when they have developmental difficulties. We've got an online system at Clifford Chance with lots and lots and lots of different opportunities, and as long as you have the time to do it, it's incredibly easy to do pro bono work.
Yeah, Narinda.
There's also opportunities as a barrister to do pro bono work, definitely. I think you have to kind of go out and get it a little bit more, because it won't necessarily be within your set of chambers. But there's a great organisation called Advocate, which used to be called the Bar Pro Bono Unit, and they sort of act as a central listing of cases that people approach them and say, oh, I need help with this hearing or this piece of advice. And then you can go onto their system and identify if there's a case that you might be able to help with, and then put yourself forward for it. And it's a really good system, because you can either volunteer to help with the whole case or just a specific task. So it means that you can give your time to someone who could really do with your expertise. And it's good for your own experience as well, because it might give you an opportunity to do more hearings and things like that, as well as really help someone.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We actually have two questions for Ola. So Ola, it's your turn. And they're very, very similar, which is basically you're doing private equity, you're working in private equity. How much of that is more finance than it is legal? Where does the sort of law start and finance ends, I suppose? And would you say that somebody doing an economics degree would be helpful in going to private equity?
Um, so this is an interesting question. It is so when it comes to sort of private equity, I think it's actually quite commercial because it's what two parties have agreed, but then that is underpinned by the Companies Act. So there is an act that kind of dictates things you can do, things that you can't do. So that is kind of the background behind it. But when you think of private equity, they're right because, of course, it is somebody's money. But I think what they're thinking about would actually come under private credit, which would probably more so sit within sort of Clifford Chance's banking and finance department. So I don't do any work to do, for example, any loans or anything like that. That's probably more the sort of banking and finance side. But I think that's why sort of maybe going to insight days or webinars that are hosted by law firms is quite useful because you might come across people with these different specialisms and they'll be able to give you sort of an overview of like what their work looks like and what the difference would be. So yeah, I don't really touch on the finance side, but I do think the economics would be potentially helpful because I think it would mean that you're quite an analytical person. And surprisingly enough, one of the reasons I wanted to be a lawyer is because I'm horrific at maths, but to my surprise, there is still maths in the job. Um, so the skill would come in handy still, I think. Yeah.
I really sympathize with her being really bad at maths, sort of aspects. So yeah, definitely. Okay, so actually somebody's asking, and I think maybe Ola, you touched on it very briefly at the end of the panel discussion. How much do you travel as a solicitor, as a barrister? Is there opportunity for travel? Can you maybe do secondments in sort of other offices? Yeah. I don't know if Ola, you want to maybe touch on that, and then if anybody else has comments, you can get this as well.
Yeah, so I think the more senior you are, the more you travel. So I share an office with a partner, which is just think of a partner for someone that's very, very senior in the business, and he travels a lot. And that's typically to check in. It links back to what I was saying of the work is very international. So of course your clients might be based in Singapore, in Dubai, in Australia. So you want to sort of go and see them in person and just kind of keep that relationship going, which is what Narinder is touching about. You kind of like build a reputation for yourself. So you want to keep those contacts going. So I think the more senior you are, the more you travel, but there are still opportunities at the more junior end. So when I was a trainee, I did a secondment for 6 months in our Frankfurt office. And that is something that is offered at Clifford Chance. And I think a lot of the bigger law firms do it, but kind of the policies vary. Some have sort of guaranteed secondment, some it's like it might come up as a thing. So if that's something that you're interested in, definitely sort of when you're doing your research or you're sort of going to these firms in person, do ask about it. And then Clifford Chance also do an associate secondment program, which allows you to go on a 6 month secondment to any Clifford Chance European office, I think it is. So that also gives you an opportunity to maybe sit and work with colleagues that you might have worked opposite, alongside on a deal, and just have the experience of working in a new city. And then outside of that, opportunities do sort of come up outside of Europe as well. But I think that is kind of led by your practice area, and it does lend itself better to some areas than others. Because, for example, if you're a UK tax lawyer, you might find it a bit more tricky to go on secondment because your knowledge is sort of the UK legal system, and there's probably people in sort of those offices better placed to advise on those matters. So yeah.
Can you avoid the traveling if you're more senior? Somebody's asking, do you have to do it if you're more senior, or do you get a choice?
I'm gonna go for yes, but I'll leave that to Alice. Yeah.
I was going to jump in. I think it depends on your role and the law firm. I don't, if you want to be in the management, as you get more, as you become a really senior partner, you might be asked to take on some of the management role. If you're working in an international law firm, you are going to have to go to those international offices. Um, However, there are departments, as Ola was saying, that you're much less likely to travel, and you could focus your career around that. But I do think one of the benefits of working in an international office is being able to travel. And so if you really don't ever want to travel, then it might be better not to work in a large international firm.
I'm just going to say, from a barrister's point of view, there's definitely opportunities to travel or to get involved in work that would involve traveling. So although we're qualified as English lawyers, those skills can still be used to assist in cases overseas as well. So a lot of people in my set of chambers do offshore work. So they'll do cases in the Cayman Islands or British Virgin Islands, or places like Jersey and Guernsey. So they'll actually go and help with hearings there. Also, as well as courts, sometimes disputes are resolved by arbitration, which is where you appoint a private party to act as your decision maker, and those can happen anywhere. So, for example, I've been involved in arbitrations involving Indian parties, so I've travelled to India to meet clients there. And then also there's just things like conferences that often take place internationally. So you might end up traveling to go and meet and network with people in that way, or just simply to visit clients who are, based elsewhere but have brought a dispute here in England. So yeah, lots of opportunities on the barrister side too.
Not the job, if you've got a fear of flying, basically.
Although it's the option, you don't have to.
Okay, so we actually are running out of time. So a really quick last question to everybody. I'm starting from Alice, Narinda, and Ola. So the opposite side of my screen now. Just really quickly, if somebody is still struggling and they're not quite sure, how do I choose between being a barrister and a solicitor? What is the one piece of advice you would give them?
Um, I would say to try and get experience off both. So even if it's going to court to watch what barristers are doing in court, and you'll see the solicitors behind them in a litigation team, and court hearings are public, so you can just go along and watch that. That will give you a sense of what the barristers do, and of trying to get some work experience within a solicitor's law firm. If you're really struggling, that's probably, in my view, the only way to know for sure.
Yeah.
My answer is going to be very quick because I would second what Alice said. That was certainly for me the deciding factor was actually going and doing work experience and trying to live that lifestyle myself for a week or two.
And Ola.
Um, I depending on where you are in your journey, I would actually say you actually have a lot of time to sort of decide. So, for example, if you're in sixth form or maybe you're in first year of university, you don't have to sort of be sure of it straight away because the point at which you have to sort of definitely make the decision is it's a bit of the way down the line. So, don't put like a lot of pressure on yourself to know by sort of an arbitrary deadline, but do the work experience and do sort of reach out to different people to get that insight.
Okay, amazing. Okay, so I think this will have to conclude the webinar for today with really big thanks to Alice, Narinda, and Ola for sharing their experiences, giving advice, being super, super honest, but encouraging as well. We really, really appreciate it. And I'm sure all of the attendees have appreciated it as well. Really sorry to everybody whose questions did not get answered. You can actually reach out to me at outreach@law.com.ac.uk. My email is in all of the emails you receive, also on the website. So it's very easy to find. If you don't remember it now, don't worry. And to ask me those questions. But we also do have another few webinars coming. The next webinar we've got is about vacation schemes, training contracts, and internships, how to be successful, what is their role. So please do go sign up to that via the link that I sent in the chat box. And then we've got another 2 webinars after that as well. But for now, thank you so, so much for attending. Thank you very much again to our panelists. Have a lovely evening ahead and a lovely rest of your week as well. See you next Monday.
Thank you.